Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. My name is Andres Martinez. I'm the director of our Schwartz Fellows program here at New America. And this is a real pleasure to have Neil Baer with us to talk about a subject that we probably should have been talking about more in the past few years. It's a nice change of pace from talking about Afghanistan or Pakistan. But New America really is in the business of trying to think about how people engage with policy debates and how you can target a broader audience than our sort of K Street, Capitol Hill axis, and trying to break out of the mold of just putting out nice white papers on policy matters, which is why we have a very strong interest in journalism here at New America and on the future of journalism. And maybe some of you were aware or came to events that we've had on, what's going to happen in the news media space, the future of newspapers, which people like me who came from that industry are sort of selfishly interested in. But when you step back and you think about it, there's no medium that's been more influential, certainly of the media that were born in the 20th century, than television, in terms of shaping how people think about public policy, whether they're watching news shows, and more interestingly and perhaps more powerfully, through entertainment, whether it's sitcoms or dramas. We had a session here not long ago with Neil talking to some of our fellows, and we were kind of comparing notes on the challenges of trying to get policy ideas and engage audiences through storytelling, which is the challenge that a newspaper reporter or a magazine writer faces, but it's also, as Neil was explaining to us, the challenge that he faces as a TV producer. And I think Neil is a kindred spirit to us think tankers in the sense that he probably would have an office down the hall somewhere had it not been for serendipity, and a series of events led him to I forget the exact story, but he got offered by somebody he knew one of the positions writing for ER. Neil had been in grad school doing public health policy and eventually got an MD, and I believe was the first doctor to write for television, and has been received many awards as the person in the medical profession who has had a bigger impact on getting public appreciation for public health matters. And Neil currently is executive producer of Law and Order Special Victims Unit. He had been, as I mentioned, the executive producer at ER. And part of the genesis of this conversation, beyond the sort of talking about the challenges of storytelling, is that television, as you can see in the headlines in today's newspaper, is also going through some of the same challenges and some of the same impacts that news media is going through in terms of the breakdown in the audience. And TV is healthier still than newspapers, as are most industries, but you don't have quite the same audiences you had in the old days for a few shows, as you've had a proliferation of more and more alternatives and options. And we all are familiar with the 500 channel cable universe, and that's presented a lot of interesting experimentation and new types of shows, but it's also kind of breaking down, balkanizing audiences so that there's not the same sort of water cooler effect of people all reading the same newspaper or watching the same TV drama. So that's just kind of to set the scene as to why we're here and why we're fortunate to have Neil here. In addition to his current perch at Law and Order, Neil has done a documentary. It's a documentary on HIV/AIDS in Africa, but seen from the perspective of children by having, he's done a photo essay project of teaching kids to use cameras and having them tell their stories, and that's a project that we might all want to hear more about. I can recall when a few years back, just to throw out an example of the types of situations where you really see the impact of entertainment TV on public policy discourse. A few years back in Los Angeles, at the LA Times, we had a delegation of military people and human rights activists come to meet with the editorial board because to discuss how worried they were that torture, the American perceptions about torture were being sort of set by 24, and that Jack Bauer's methods on every night was kind of influencing not just public perceptions but also perhaps the ideas of sort of frontline soldiers and agents about what's effective and what's possible, and we felt a little bit helpless on an editorial page at a newspaper. I mean, we could preach about torture, but it was one of those sort of humbling moments where you realize that our reach versus a blockbuster TV drama, it was just a completely different scale, and so it was probably a more productive use of their time, of these human rights groups, to engage the producers of 24. And that was one instance that I can think of in recent times where the linkage between entertainment television and public policy has been very upfront and center. And interestingly, Niels is going to talk a little bit about an upcoming episode of his show, which once again touches on the question of torture and solitary confinement. But I think the best thing now would be to turn this over to Neil to walk us through some examples of instances in his show where he has very consciously set up a debate on a policy issue, and you can talk about how you approach this, and it must be a fine line between at one level you want to entertain people, but being a kindred spirit in a sort of policy walk, I know that you're really trying to get people to think about social policy and some of these wrenching debates that we all face.
Right.
So welcome, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What is it about drama that is so captivating to us? And, you think back to the first movie you saw. The first movie I saw was West Side Story, and I remember sitting there being very young, like 4 years old, and the color and the movement and the dancing and the drama and the fighting, and I just was hooked. There's something in us, in our brains, I think, that really is structured to tell stories. That's how we get information across to each other. Our lives are just a continuous looping of different kinds of stories. Think about all the stories you've told just today to your friends, your spouse, colleagues. We organize our lives through stories, and when we can't do that, we're at a loss. If you know someone who's had Alzheimer's, that's a disease that robs you of your ability to tell stories. So I've always been taken with stories as a kid and loved to tell them, and I kind of ultimately found my niche, fortunately, by being able to tell them on television. And medicine was great for me because it really taught me how to listen to patients, and every patient has a story. I had Bill Macy say that. William H. Macy said that once on ER. Every patient has a story. Let's go find out his. And but that was me, sort of getting at every patient. And sometimes when you don't listen to their story, you really screw up, or you don't ask the right questions, you screw up. So I'm very interested in drama and comedy too, because comedy can also tell stories. But the comedy is just it's a structure somewhat like drama, but it tells a story. So what is it about a drama that captivates us? The characters, the beginning, it has a beginning, middle, and end, sometimes not in that order, but it takes us to a place that we can identify with. We fall in love with characters. We can take our own lives and put it up against that story and maybe evaluate how we think. Maybe it changes our minds. We see the world in a different way through the characters. So because in my own history, I was a graduate student in sociology, and I did a lot of work at the Kennedy School. I've always been interested in social policy, so I felt that there was a way to do that on television that maybe hasn't been done enough, or at least I had the sort of carte blanche to do it. And I learned early on, Andres just said, but do I try to make it entertaining? I never think about entertaining the audience, never. Entertainment seems, pejorative. It's like I'm going to be wasting your time, or you're going to come see something, to forget about things. And maybe you do that with some shows you watch, but I don't want my shows to be, kind of mind-numbing. I also don't think about educating per se. I'm not there to teach you something, though I hope you learn something from my shows. And so we go through a lot of the articles that come out of New America and other think tanks as well, because we're interested in getting the research. We really want to make layers for our show, and I think that's why my show does well in syndication. You know, I think 2.5 million people or so watch Mad Men, but 45.6 million people watch SVU a week because it's on in multiple places. But it has some kind of, it captures people, and I think it's because of the story. It's because of you're going to see things on multiple viewings, and that's unique viewers that maybe you didn't see before, but it has a lot of research in it. You learn things in spite of yourself. And when I teach a course at USC and I have students look at, some clips, I'll ask them just to look at the clip, and I'll ask them what they've learned, and they'll start telling me, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, this, and then I'll have them look at it again and actually write down all the things, and they're really pretty amazed. And I did a study with Kaiser Family Foundation some years ago on human papillomavirus and cervical cancer. And we did this study where 9% of the audience knew HPV caused cervical cancer. This is before Gardasil came out, the vaccine. And then the show aired, and we did a random sample and surveyed people again, and 30% knew. We didn't say, watch this show and you're going to learn something. We just aired the show. But people learned in spite of themselves. And so I try to make what we do as accurate as possible within the confines. I mean, maybe they get the DNA results back more quickly than they would in reality on our show. But I don't put in things that are wrong, at least wrong that I know. I mean, when I did ER and we treated HIV on the show, obviously the treatment of HIV evolved and we had to change with it. And I watch the old shows and I go, wow, that's really wrong. But it was right for the time. So I'm very concerned about the issues that you're all concerned about, and I think there is a place for them on television. So then I think about, how does one do it in a felicitous way so that I'm not preaching and I can give multiple sides. And that's what policymakers and policy writers are doing too. They're analyzing the issue, trying to understand all the points of view, and then marshal the data to make their point. Well, I don't marshal the data in the same way, but I marshal it in an emotional way to make my points. And I'm going to show you some clips to explain, to illustrate that. So why don't I start? I'm just going to, if that's all right, yeah. I'll start. I'm going to show you like one or two clips of some pressing policy issues and how we...
And by the way, we're at the opposite end of the spectrum where when we put out something, we do try to entertain. Yeah. We think consciously.
Yes, you do.
Can we entertain people?
And you try to entertain them, but then you hope that you'll have an audience. And we're always worried about the audience. First of all, can we capture an audience? So you have all of these articles in popular cultural venues, and I have my show on NBC, at least, hopefully, for the next year. No telling. But then
until they move Jay Leno till 9, then
or 8, or as the executive said, I said, nobody knows we're on at 9 o'clock on Wednesdays, and it would be better Tuesdays at 10. And she said, well, maybe that'll happen soon. So you never know. I think they're pretty upset about what's going on. But the point that I want to make about what I do is that I try to tell stories that have resonance and robustness to them. So that's why I don't think about entertaining or educating. I think, is it robust? Is it resonant? Will it get someone? Can they then, talk to their friends and family and whoever about it? And then I'm now thinking more, and we can talk about this, and we'll have time for questions. How do I link people after they've watched the show to what you all are doing, or to policymakers, or to more information? And that's where new media really comes in. There's some really vibrant ways that we can connect people more than we ever were able to before, so that we can make more of a difference, I think. So keep that in mind as we're doing this, but let's see. Whoops.
Dr. Sutton said doctors keep things under control. A fact suggests that interrogators can become more aggressive when they can rely on doctors to set limits.
That may be true, Ms. Novak, but unless you have evidence of Dr. Sutton's specific involvement in the events at Abu Ghraib, I suggest you move on.
Dr. Sutton, could you please tell the jurors what they are looking at in this picture?
It's a stress position, known as Kazat al-Tawila.
This is part of your benign interrogation method?
Yes?
The hood, what's that for?
It's placed over the prisoner's head to disorient him.
You use an air conditioner to drop the body's temperature.
No more than 5 degrees.
How long is a prisoner kept in that position?
It depends.
How long, Dr. Sutton?
24 to 48 hours.
You've never seen this lead to physical harm?
No.
How much medical follow-up have you done?
That's left to the camp physicians.
You had no idea that a stress position could tear a rotator cuff? You had no clue that a long ice bath might lead to a coroner. A fifth of the detainees that died of natural causes in U.S. custody died of heart attacks, many of them young men with no history of heart disease. And yet you, a successful medical professional, had no suspicion that your methods might lead to death? Or didn't you care?
Ms. Novak, let me ask you a question. How would you protect our country? I have a son in Iraq. How would you protect him?
Your Honor.
No, you answer me. Intelligence gathering is one of the few weapons we have in the war on terror.
Your Honor.
Maybe the only way to fight an enemy we can't see. You think asking nicely is going to get them to tell us when they plan to fly the next set of planes into our buildings?
Dr. Sutton, that's enough.
So let's see, how do I turn this?
He did it because I asked him to.
And now Wayne is on trial and you were free. Does that seem fair to you?
Objection.
Okay. So you can see that was done actually 3 years ago. So was not done this past year with Holder as our new Attorney General, because I was really interested in this topic, and being a physician, I was interested in the ethical dilemma of taking the Hippocratic Oath and working to do or to teach military personnel torture light, L-I-T-E. But you saw the different positions that each character, Elizabeth McGovern, the guest star, and Diane Neal, the star of our show, presented in that one little piece. That there you could dramatize a policy issue. You know, is torture something that's justified? And if you saw the whole show, then you'd see, actually, just like reading a whole piece, you'd see that we really got into the issue. And we try not to make judgments per se, but only in terms of myself, even though I have very strong feelings, but through the characters. So then the question is, is this a viable way to do policy? And does it? And also, I think we did this as the other approach to 24. Because 24 had a very different approach to doing a show about torture, and so we did ours, as the other side of it. Not meaning that torture is bad, but really questioning the issue and should doctors be involved. So there is a policy issue that became, a dramatic through line for an episode, and I think that television shows are really set up for that because there's so much conflict in this debate, and there still is conflict, and we don't know if the Obama administration is really going to go forward or how far they're going to go in determining whether laws were broken or not.
It's interesting in the case of 24, they you're right, there was no hint that there was a debate about the issue at the time, but then they had to sort of play catch up and adapt, and a few seasons later, Jack Bauer had to face a congressional hearing in a very far-fetched episode. But
it's interesting because the New England Journal, that you bring that up, in the first year of ER, researchers from Duke asked for the first season, and I was happy to give it to them. I said, "Oh, they're fans," and then they wrote a piece in the New England Journal criticizing us for showing that cardiopulmonary resuscitation is too effective on our show versus real life, and people are going to get the wrong idea. In spite of conflating the data and using Rescue 911, which always had positive outcomes, whatever, in Chicago Hope, which always had hope, they had a good point. And they conflated the data because sometimes we would have 10 seconds of a resuscitation, and sometimes we would devote the whole show to it, and they would count that as each as a separate incident and make them equivalent, and they weren't. But they had a really good point that people do learn. We know that from many studies. They learn from TV, and so should we be more accurate? And so I wrote the editorial rebuttal saying, criticizing their research. But then I did do an episode where Noah Wiley broke an elderly gentleman's ribs and punctured his lung and did all kinds of stuff in trying so hard to save his life, and made the point, because that was a really good point. So,
Neil, can I just ask you, you put a lot of thought into this. You've got facts. You research it, and then you send this out into the ether. Literally, you broadcast it into the air, and then, I mean, this is sort of something that we would grapple with at newspapers. How do you measure impact?
Right.
I mean, what do you have? Is there a feedback loop? How do you? You mentioned that you did something with Kaiser on a specific
right. So we
issue,
did Kaiser,
but week in and week out, how
right.
do you?
Well, people who write letters to you or email you, like when we did homeschooling, and I had the audacity to say that, schools are safety nets, public and private, and when you send your child out to a school, someone else is going to see them, and if you homeschool your kid, you can keep your kid away from everybody else. And the homeschooling network did not like this episode. But that was fine because, that's, obviously true, about schools being a safety net. So we don't have a way of measuring per se. But, unless you look at ratings. And then I don't know what action people take, certainly. We do know that with a study from Kaiser, if you're going to change your behavior and use condoms so you don't get cervical cancer from HPV, you have to know that HPV causes cervical cancer. You have to know about the debates. So there is certainly that element that you want to do well on your show so so that you can have people discuss it. So I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that
let's take
with blogs, I mean,
right.
I read the blogs, so I know, but sorry, go ahead.
Well, taking it to the next step, I mean, if you were reading something in today's Washington Post about this debate and, how far should interrogation techniques go and reports about what actually has happened, you would click, if you're reading this online, you could click onto perhaps some, investigation, and
right.
you could read through the primary source. And you hinted earlier at sort of what new media affords
right.
traditional TV. If you're doing this episode 5 years from now, what are the kind of things that you can integrate into the show for people, for the small percentage of your audience, but a pretty large number of people who are going to want to learn more and kind of engage the issue directly?
Well, I'm struggling with that now on my documentary about AIDS orphans, and when you watch the show, most people are emotionally moved and they cry when they see it. It's pretty devastating. So how do I get them to the next step of, taking action? Or someone sees this and they want to take action. So we've partnered with Participant, which did Inconceivable Truth and Food Inc. and Good Night and Good Luck. And they have TakePart.com, which is just starting. It's in beta testing, and they are going to take our show. And I have the show. I'm going to show you a clip about solitary confinement, and they're going to have links. And you can go on NBC.com, and they'll link you to TakePart.com, and we can put up a link on the show and say, for more information, I'm going to Twitter that night about solitary confinement. I have links on Take Part. So for my documentary, for instance, I have ways that you can get involved with directly by funding, AIDS orphan projects, learning more from UN AIDS, reading a book called There Is No Me Without You, and we have a curriculum so that high schools and community reading and book clubs can read this book and really get involved. I have ways for community groups to to sponsor a school, build a little village for these kids who live on garbage dumps. So that's the point. And how do you take action from this? And I've always been interested in that. I did it on ER by working with Johns Hopkins and the NBC affiliate. So I would take a medical issue that night, say kidney transplantation, and then they would do a piece on it from Hopkins, and then they would funnel it out to all of the NBC affiliates. And that was in the old days when there was no internet. That was in the late 90s. Now I don't need that. I can do it through the internet, and I can partner with various organizations. So with Facebook, Twitter, blogging, and the network themselves and their own website, I can make links so that people can find out more, so they can read more, and they can take action if they want as well. So I think that that's something we were never able to do really in the past, and now we're able to do it. Now you can start raising questions like, well, who do you link to, and who gets that?
Right.
And that's those are important questions.
Well,
those will come up soon.
I want us to go to another clip, but before I think a question that maybe other people might have is, I mean, you're talking about doing all this in sort of a vacuum, and I'm a huge fan of 30 Rock, so I'm wondering if there's some kind of Alec Baldwin-like GE executive who calls you from time to time and says, you know, make sure you're showing both sides of an issue, or maybe, you know, some issues are a little too edgy perhaps for a certain audience and sensibilities about advertisers. How often do you get phone calls from nervous execs to sort of set boundaries?
Well, let me show you the next clip. You didn't know what I was going to. You don't know what the next clip is about, but watch the next clip, and the answer is in the clip. If I can make it go.
Did you get in trouble for this one? Is that
No, I've never gotten in trouble. Well, see, I'm giving
Well, you should
away.
try.
I'm trying.
No further questions.
I think it's going now. I hope. Nope.
I think you paused.
Now. Help. I can. Is it playing? No, I don't want this. Let's try it again. Let's see. We'll
Dr.
probably see
Sutton
torture
said
again.
doctors keep things under
Okay, let's see.
control.
So we have to go
A fact
forward.
suggests that interrogators can become more aggressive when they can rely on doctors.
Heck, the fetus. Then why does this family court
Okay,
order
now I
make
know
me
it's
so
good.
afraid?
I think.
Because if you follow the court's line of thinking to its inevitable conclusion, then every pregnant woman could...
And recommend that all kids be vaccinated.
You're
I
seeing
know
everything.
what's best for my...
How would you protect our country? I
Sorry,
have a
we'll
son
just
in
use
Iraq.
Elizabeth
How would you
McGovern.
protect him?
Your Honor.
Say it
No,
again.
you answer me.
This
Intelligence
is the other
gathering
side.
is one of the few weapons we have in the war
Flagrant
on terror.
Your Honor,
violation.
The only way to
of rules,
fight an enemy we can't see. You think asking nicely is going to get them to tell us when they plan to fly the next set of planes into our buildings?
Dr. Sutton, that's enough.
Yeah, let's...
All right, so Andre's
But you
asking-
didn't think about how your choice would affect other children.
Sierra Walker isn't my child. I can't make choices for her.
But you did. You made a choice, and now she's dead. Your actions are directly responsible
a
for her
couple
death.
clips
If she
that
hadn't
answer
contracted measles, she would still be alive.
Is there a question here, Your Honor?
Right.
Is there, Miss Cabot?
Miss Stewart, what is your medical degree in?
I don't have one.
But you were making medical choices on behalf of your child.
Just because I don't have a degree doesn't mean I can't be an informed parent.
You chose your informed opinion over that of people who do in fact have a medical degree and understand the science behind vaccinations and recommend that all kids be vaccinated.
I know what's best for my child.
If you know what's best, and the doctors are of a different opinion, then it stands to reason that they don't have your child's best interest at heart.
Their science is just another opinion.
Your opinion killed a little girl.
Your Honor.
I'm just trying to show that if Miss Stewart had vaccinated her child, Sierra Walker would be alive today.
I'm not sure that's true.
You're not.
That woman was a horrible mother. It was just a matter of time until something tragic happened.
You're the one on trial, Miss Stewart.
Exactly. And how fair is that? I'm the good mother. I make sure my child eats well, is taken care of. She buried her daughter in a shallow grave.
Yes. She buried the child that you murdered.
Because she didn't vaccinate her child. And
I bet someone's finally airing the prison system's dirty laundry.
Are you buying Donovan's BS?
Humans are social creatures. Prolonged isolation warps our humanity.
That's what happened to you, Munch? Donovan is a hard man. I mean, he's playing like a little alone time made him crazy. Give me a break.
The Brits did a study of solitary confinement. They found it causes psychosis. They stopped using it.
You gotta control the prison somehow. Hall's a good way to do it.
Funny, when some prisons stopped using isolation, inmate violence went down.
You stop treating convicts like animals, they act like men. I'll buy that. But that does not mean solitary is torture.
Then why was it the preferred method of torture used on the hostages in Iran, the POWs in Vietnam, and at Abu Ghraib? The mind can survive prison, but we're not wired to be alone.
When I was in prison undercover, the worst part was never being alone. No private time, no quiet time, even on the toilet. I would have killed to do a stint in the hole.
We buy free-range chickens because we believe they're healthier, not being trapped in cages. We care more about poultry than people.
You want to take pity on Donovan? He threw me off a roof.
This is a smokescreen to make the jury forget what this is really about. You tried to kill a cop.
The blue wall should remind them.
So that's out next week about solitary confinement being torture. But we'll go on to one
If
other
the mother has a drinking problem, why not give her treatment so her behavior doesn't harm her unborn child? Everything in me as a wife and a mother agrees with the urge to protect the fetus. Then why does this family court order make me so afraid? Because if you follow the court's line of thinking to its inevitable conclusion, then every pregnant woman could be monitored by the state. Today it's alcohol. What's next? Driving? You could get into an accident. Prescription meds, all those side effects. Dieting. Baby might suffer. In fact, why not prohibit every activity which could harm the fetus? If you give the fetus rights to the extent the family court demands, then all you women here must be prepared to lose your own rights. And where will it end? With you as nothing more than childbearing receptacles with no right to privacy and no right to control your own bodies.
Jennifer Fulton is here because she ignored a court order not to drink. She's promised not to drink again and to attend an outpatient facility. But she's broken these promises before. So how can she guarantee that she won't break them again? She can't. You've been asked to consider the mother's rights, but don't forget about the rights of the child Jennifer wants to have. Doesn't that child have the right to be born healthy? Or must it suffer its entire life just to uphold the mother's right to do whatever she wants with her body? You know Jennifer can't help herself, so I'm asking you to help her by finding her guilty. Yes, she will be locked up, but she will also be given at state expense the treatment that she needs to ensure the safe delivery of her baby. So isn't that what everyone here wants?
How often did you and Wayne have sex?
To answer your question.
Once. We didn't mean for it to happen. It just did.
And when was it that you knew you were pregnant?
Not until about 13 weeks later, when I missed my third period.
And why didn't you tell somebody, your doctor, your father?
I was afraid.
Afraid of what?
My father. That he'd throw me out of the house. I mean, I knew I couldn't take care of a baby on my own.
There are legal ways to terminate a pregnancy. Did you consider them?
Yes. I tried to buy the abortion pill, but the pharmacist wouldn't sell it.
Why not?
He said it was against his conscience. We went to the hospital, but they said that they needed my father's consent.
And you were too afraid to tell him?
And I read on the internet about this herb that could cause an abortion. But it just made me really sick.
And then you came to New York.
I called a clinic. It was the first ad I saw in the phone book, and they seemed nice. But by the time I saw the doctor, he said I was past 24 weeks. And that it was too late. I had no way out. I wanted to kill myself. I told Wayne to start hitting me. He did it because I asked him to.
And now Wayne is on trial and you were free. Does that seem fair to you?
Objection.
No further questions.
You packed a lot in there.
So they do let us do any topic we want because they know that they have for 11 years because they know that we present the various sides. And so this is a girl who was from Virginia, and she was pregnant, and they have notification laws. So she went to New York, and it turns out the doctor at the abortion clinic lied to her and said she had a fever so that she would be past dates, and that was happening too. But it was her boyfriend's on trial for killing the fetus because he beat her, because as she just said, she told him to. But it raises all of these issues in a dramatic way, and the network has never stepped in, fortunately. I guess they trust us that we will, present the multitude of sides. So you saw the father there, and in another part of the scene, she says, well, your father's here supporting you. And you saw in the solitary confinement, really the debate about, Belzer's character says, we care more about chickens because we have free-range chickens, but we don't have free-range prisons. And the other cops are saying, why should we?
I'm curious in terms of the what happens at the in the creative process. You're having these characters, debate the issue and taking different sides, and I'm sure it's actually consistent with their personalities,
right.
And there's some consistency, so you don't have, it's not completely random. But does this mimic? Are you mimicking this at the writing stage in terms of? Do you have a team of people that you have assembled that have very different viewpoints, and you guys are having these debates, and then the debates are kind of being transferred on screen with these characters, or are you able to kind of be the puppeteer and yourself kind of inform each side, or do you feel like you need to kind of have this debate with others as you're writing?
Well, we have a lot of consultants, but we're the puppeteers. I mean, just like you all, if you're writing a piece on torture or abortion or whatever, you have a perspective and you're making an argument. Right. So we're making arguments and thinking through the various arguments, pro and con, in an ethical way. And it's really, these are ethical debates on, what your perspective is, what you believe. And so we don't have, big fights. I mean, we have fights with the actors because the actors say, I don't feel this way. And I don't.
Oh, really?
It's like, oh, yeah. Mariska will say, I believe everybody has a conscience. And I said, but your character doesn't, because your character is a product of a rape, and you think that the violence that you sometimes feel and show may be because your father was a rapist, and you don't believe that. And Chris Maloney's character is a product of a very strict Catholic upbringing, and he was a Marine, and his father was a cop, and his character is anti-choice and believes people have consciences and things like that. Now, Chris Maloney, who was brought up Catholic, actually doesn't have the same beliefs as his character and has no problem playing that. Mariska has more of a problem doing that. So we have these discussions about it. I mean, Mariska in the fetal alcohol show, she was like all gung-ho on that. Lock that mother up and don't let her drink. But it's a really important question. It's a really important question because, as Mariette Hartley talked about, where do you draw the line? Seatbelts, skiing, is it just, is the mother a receptacle? There is a lot packed into these shows. But I think that we're able to, just as a journalist, I hope, we're able to we don't report per se, but we write the stories, but we try to include the various perspectives because that's more interesting. If we were just doing a diatribe of this is, how one should think or feel, it wouldn't be very conflictual.
Right.
There wouldn't be, much to state. So we really try to find, and then as I read them, if I find it's going more one way or another, then we try to really bring in that point of view.
Do you feel that, I alluded earlier to the sort of breakdown of audiences and the fact that people have so many more options. Is that one of the reasons that perhaps you have more latitude to explore edgier topics? I mean, in a universe where everybody had to watch one of 3 networks, it was hard to sort of opt out. Whereas now, I mean, if you seek out a show, you're practically, you're opting in. Does that sense give you? I mean, I realize that the time of night when you're airing the show also has a big influence on this. But is there a sense that there's more artistic independence to explore these topics than there might have been 20 years ago, or is in your experience it's pretty much constant?
I think actually no. I think that when I did ER and Gloria Rubin's character was HIV positive, that was the first and last character on primetime television who was HIV positive. And I think we're in a very different climate. It doesn't matter. I think if you talk about sex and violence on television in terms of cable, nudity, and language, then there's a huge difference.
Right.
If you watch Nip Tuck or whatever show you choose on cable, there's a lot more latitude. We can't say certain words, but I feel we don't need to on our show. And if you look at shows, for instance, on CBS, they're pretty graphic. There's a lot of blood in CSI and CSI Miami, New York, and Criminal Minds. We fired a gun, I think, 3 times in the 11 years the show's been on. There's psychological violence on our show. So I think that there's been actually a move away from doing controversial shows. I don't think you would see the clips I just showed you. You would see on ABC. You wouldn't see it on ABC, the home of Desperate Housewives and Grey's Anatomy. You wouldn't see it on CBS. You might see it on Fox. Mm-hmm. And I think that's because there's a fear that the audience might not like it. And I think there has been a real change since shows like NYPD Blue and ER and West Wing and those shows were on in the past. There's really been no replacement for shows that grapple with policy. I don't think that television is the next bastion for, unfortunately, or at least this year, for discussing policy.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, there's some shows like yours that are ostensibly not about, policy making.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the...
There's only been one, West Wing, really.
Right. Right. And I guess there were short-lived attempts, weren't there, to have some dramas or sitcoms set in D.C. about young staffers and
but
on
would
the
that
Hill.
Really be about policy? Or?
And they never went anywhere. Right. And but every so often there's talk that policy in Washington is going to be sexy again, whether or hugely significant and therefore something that was going to be hard for Hollywood to avoid after 9/11 and now with sort of Obama and the crisis. But you don't see this in the horizon.
No.
So the trick still is to take sort of traditional subjects and inject some of this there as opposed to...
Well, there's policy everywhere.
Right.
And so I just have always looked for the political issues. I don't want to write a show every week about someone getting raped. And when I took over SVU, in the second year, I said to Dick Wolf, I'm not going to do it if we have to just find bodies every week and there's been someone raped. I want to do it as a way in, okay, fine, there's a sex crime, but I'm going to get into the issues because that's what I'm interested in.
Right.
So it's really the interest of the writers. And certainly 24, Joel Surnow is very interested in these issues, just as I am. He has a different perspective or the way that he presented the show, though the show's changed and Joel's not on the show any longer and he's moved on to other shows and the show has changed some. But I think that, there's always ideology in every show. There's a presentation of male-female relationships, power relationships, sexuality, And that's the same for policy as well. There's always an ideological framework. There's a perspective. There is, I believe, no objectivity. So you will find in any show an ideology that's conveyed through the writing. And even on our show, where we try to be, I hate the word balance, but we try to show different perspectives. I don't like the word balance because it feels like it's a pejorative word that waters down everything. But I really want people to
You could say fair and balanced.
Yeah, I don't say fair and balanced at all. I say it's grappling with the issues, and hopefully we'll bring up the issues. But I think there's been a move away from those kinds of shows to either shows that are very procedural or shows that are very soap opera-ish. But Mad Men, that's very successful amongst the literati, is a very ideologically based show. It's a show about women coming into power. And you know, dressed up in beautiful 60s costumes and sets, but it's really about women coming into power and power changes, power shifts in the 60s. And so it's not a policy show per se. They're not dealing with social policy.
Social issues. Yeah.
But it's social issues that policy always deals with. We're always dealing with so now our show is dealing with, should women have complete control over their fetuses? And so we make all these, we have this huge debate on the show in the episode about that. And it's really interesting and to me, and that's goes at the heart of the debate about abortion, and people can disagree, but I think we should be able to put, and we should strive to put those kinds of stories on television, but I think writers have tended to shy away from it. There are advocacy organizations in Hollywood that provide information. So Hollywood Health and Society, that's funded by Gates and the CDC, provide writers with any information they need. So when I did the show about immunization, there's another section that says, in 1989 to 91, there was a measles epidemic in England, and 123 kids died. And we don't hear, and that was the last time there was an epidemic. And now that so many, and we talk about how many kids are not vaccinated now, and we're kind of getting, we might be shaping up for another epidemic. I could put out that data, and I want it to be accurate. And yes, we do break, evidentiary procedure, but it's a drama. We try to be as,
I hope you're writing a Roman Polanski episode.
We're talking about it because it's a very interesting. So
you can make some friends in Hollywood with that one,
or actually not. I mean, it's like if we did it the way I think we'd want to do it,
right.
we probably wouldn't.
Let's, if it's okay, let's open it up. Get reactions, questions from you all, since we're all experts when it comes to TV. In the back there.
I'm super excited that you're here, and I also miss Casey Novak. I want her back post haste.
Don't you like Cabot? She's coming back in episode 5.
She's just too cute for me. Casey had some grit, and I really appreciated
well,
that.
Have you watched the first 2 with Christine Lottie?
Not yet, actually.
Oh, okay. Did you TiVo it?
I just moved here, so I'm trying to get used to myself.
Oh, okay. Well, it's 9 o'clock on Wednesday. But we have Christine Lottie, who is really a sharp ADA, so we're trying different things.
Okay, cool.
So go ahead.
I do have a question, though. I mean, as far as your work, looking back through ER, even SVU, I've noticed that there is a certain amount of diversity within each show. I'm looking back like Eric LaSalle, and you've got Ice-T in SVU right now, and of course B.D. Wong. My question is, are you planning to kind of expand as far as the officers and the people that are in the show? Because I look at it now, I did like an undergraduate study of your characters, at least in SVU, looking at how stereotypical both Ice-T and B.D. Wong's characters are. The Asian is very quiet, intelligent, and Ice-T is just Ice-T. So, I mean, where do you go when you...
Tamara Tooney.
That's true.
Who's a pathologist.
That's true. I'm looking at it like, I'd say, as far as the pathologist, like, she'd be the only non-stereotypical ethnic person that you have on the show right now. So my question is, where do you pull in, like, different guest stars to, like, show diversity and those types of things?
Right. Well, it's interesting you ask about B.D. Wong, because this year, in episode 5, in an episode called Hardwired, about are pedophiles hardwired, and if they are, what do we do about it? He outs himself as being gay. So I don't think there are men of color on network television who are also gay. So that's coming up. And then he's going to put his license in jeopardy over an issue about treating heroin addiction with ibogaine, which is a drug that It's a very interesting drug that is illegal to use, but has shown some promise in treating and having very promising results in treating addiction. So we actually grapple with that. And Ice-T is going to go toe-to-toe, and I'm telling you this because we do think about it, with John Larroquette over a hate crime, a hate speech episode, and talk about, why is it that children of color or immigrant children don't get the same screen time on the news when they disappear. So we're getting into that. But we do think about that a lot, and we had Adam Beach on, who is a Native American, and we try to, what's funny is we try to not make perps. We try to not be stereotypic when, if there's a prostitute and a pimp, that they're both African American. And we really, it's funny, early on, like in season 1 or 2, we had a psychiatrist character who was doing repressed memory stuff, and she was putting false memories into a patient. And we were thinking, like, whom should we hire? We were going to hire CCH Pounder. We ultimately didn't. We hired Shirley Knight because we had this interesting debate about, we so rarely see a black psychiatrist. Do we want to see a bad black psychiatrist? And so we got into this whole these are the kinds of debates we get into with the writers. Like, how are we depicting people who so rarely get depicted in a positive light, or even in that job? Should we do it? So we got into a real debate about that, and I thought it was really interesting. So we do try, but you point out an issue that we should probably do a better job at it, but we do think about it.
How big a team do you have? I mean, how many people would write on a show like this? I don't have.
For our show, 7. So a show like House has 10. And that's because we've cut down. We used to have 3 more writers, but because of the finances of Hollywood now, we have fewer writers because there's they've put the screws to us financially, and so we're trying to figure out how to still have the quality on the screen and do that as well.
Others? How about here on the front?
It seems increasingly that our government is captivated by the extremes on both ends, ideology, and people are struggling in the middle to really ask the question, can government work anymore on our behalf? So that's one observation. Then I think about a series like The Wire, which the system was the protagonist, basically, and they really try to do, from all aspects, a way to educate people on the deep-rooted problems, and not just symptoms, characters, programs, but the deep-rooted nature of how it all connects. So my question is this: is there any way you think in the future that we can get a Wire-like program to point out all the things we're wrestling with, healthcare and all the economics and foreign policy, to educate people, to engage them much more in political action toward a positive end? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That's a hard question. David Simon's doing a show about post-Katrina New Orleans. The Wire was not a successful show in terms of numbers, but it certainly had a powerful influence on policymakers, I think, because they watched it. And HBO didn't care so much about the numbers because it's a subscription service. Television is changing so much that everything's going to be subscription soon. There will be no networks anymore because you won't need the networks. There'll be studios as a place to make the show. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to see some real cutting-edge programs because it will all be about people purchasing what they were interested in. Now the question is, how do you get people interested in seeing that and not Cougar Town, which is really a kind of a meretricious show, and yet it's doing really well now. They had a lot of advertising for it, and it's just people watch it. So you get into this whole problem of commerce. Like, I'm sure if people, West Wing was not watched by a lot of people compared to Cougar Town. Or Grey's Anatomy, but West Wing had a very high high income level viewership, so it was able to sustain on the show. And it trickles down, and you want things to trickle down so that there'll be a discussion. And what Andres was saying is that my fear is that we're so niched that any kind of discussion that once would have occurred. I saw Roots. I saw The Defenders, and they were defending a woman who was a heroin addict. And you can go back and watch all these shows. They're really path-breaking. They're amazing shows that were done in the 60s on television when there were just 3 networks. Really, cutting edge. Now, and people saw them, and they discussed them. Now you want to watch gardening all day long, you can. And so how do we, that's just the big question, how do we get people to watch it? Because we have to have people watch it in order to make it, to pay for it. And I come back to this. I think that good stories, maybe I'm Pollyannish, but good stories win out. I think that, yes, trashy stuff will still be on as well, but really good stories that grip you, excite you, make you think. There's a big segment of the population that wants that, and so we have to keep working for that. And that's my only answer to that is I think we can do a show like that. I think it'll probably have to be on cable. But, it's a possibility, and we can also do it through the web. The web is kind of tricky because the web hasn't sustained yet its promise of, Dr. whatever with Neil Patrick Harris had a huge number of people, and then it drops off. And we haven't seen webisode series. They're just like the niche programming on cable. They appeal to a very small number of people, and they can watch it. But we haven't seen it spread out to that large number that you want. You want people to see a show about, an issue like healthcare reform. You can't present it as healthcare reform. You can present a story of, like we did on ER maybe 8 years ago, a kid has type 2 diabetes. Father has lost his job. Comes in to Noah Wiley and says, my kid is sick, and the kid has type 1 diabetes. No, type 2 diabetes, because we were doing that. The kid's obese. And Noah treats him, says, you got to get prescriptions for insulin and da-da. And he goes, well, can't you give it to me under the table because I don't have my insurance yet, and I'm starting my job in 2 weeks, and it's going to be a pre-existing condition. And Noah breaks the law and does it, and it has terrible repercussions for everybody because they find out, etc. But the point was, look, this is an issue about pre-existing conditions and insurance, and people got it. And they're like, wow, is that fair? I mean, this guy is like, he said, I'll control my son's eating for 2 weeks until I get my new job, I promise. And then the kid comes in ketoacidotic, and, because the father wasn't able to do it. So we were able to illustrate those issues, I think, in a pretty profound way. But unfortunately, back then on ER, or fortunately but then, there were lots of people who were able to watch it. We didn't have the cable competition. Now there's so much competition, everybody can do that. So what does that mean for our culture? These are really profound. That's a very profound question you're asking. I don't know the answer, except we got to just keep telling good stories.
That's where I really do see this analogy to the news media and the fact that the niches. There was once upon a time we all would watch, Walter Cronkite.
That's right.
I think I read recently that almost 100 million people tuned in to see Who Shot JR
right.
on that Dallas episode,
right.
and those days are gone.
Or the end of MASH.
Yeah.
But not that many people tuned in to see the end of ER.
Joanne?
In the collapse of traditional media, you may not be able to answer this, but one thing is that people, in addition to that we don't have a common Walter Cronkite to watch, people tend to gravitate to people who agree with them, so that someone who reads my blog is not the same person as reading, some extreme right-wing blog. And also there's a lot of research that if you present a fact to somebody who believes a myth, they continue to believe their myth. And I'm just wondering, in the using drama and fiction, do you have any sense whether people go away with their own opinions and beliefs confirmed because you've presented both sides, or because it's not presented in a didactic, this is the fact? Do you sense that people come away hearing the other side, because we're currently living in a society where nobody is hearing anything that anybody else says?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. You're right, I don't know the answer to that. I'm hoping that when they see next week's show about solitary confinement, that they just hear the argument. I know anecdotally that people do, because people write in and say, you know, on occasion, I never thought about that before. And, you know, but it tends to be when your life hits a crisis in your own life that those kinds of things change. So you might be anti-gay rights, and then your child is gay, and then either you kick the child out or you become an advocate. And I've seen that happen, you know, with friends. So I've seen that happen with abortion issues. So when they struggle with it, and then they'll remember the show. And storytelling helps in that way, because we do get a lot of email from survivors of sexual abuse saying, your show shows me that I shouldn't be ashamed. I should talk about it, even though it happened 20 years ago. So that does happen, in terms of, but that's not an issue per se. That's kind of reaching out to survivors. But what's interesting about our show is it cuts across so many viewerships, and that we have a lot of young women who only have high school education attainment, because we have all the SES breakdowns for our show, and they love Mariska. And so they watch the show, and we have people who have graduate degrees, and it has a very high viewership. We have a very high African American viewership. It's like it was the number 4 or 5 show the last time that data, you know, the data were done, because I think of Ice-T probably is attractive in some ways. And we do a lot of issues that deal with issues that everybody faces, and maybe African Americans do in particular, in terms of healthcare issues or access or things like that we've done on the show. But I can't say per se that those discussions are going to change people's opinions. But it's really an interesting. I guess we should do a study on it. but if it were done enough, don't you think that if these issues were debated in a dramatic way, that, you know, had some depth to them, that if it was done enough, that it couldn't hurt? Yeah.
Right behind John.
Hi, how long does it take you to get current issues written into episodes? So what's the lag time? If something happened today that you wanted to write about, how long does it take?
This is the Roman Polanski question.
Right. Well, when the whole sort of story broke on pedophilia in the Catholic Church, we did do the show like in about 3 weeks. So that was with Eric Stoltz. You know, it depends where we are in the year. So I tend not to like to. Law and Order rips from the headlines, so I'm sure that they'll try to do the Roman Polanski show, and I try not to do that so much, because I feel it's a little tawdry. I'd rather take a policy issue and try to explore it than to do the Roman Polanski. In fact, we probably won't do it.
But shouldn't you have first dibs on sex crimes?
Well, we used to say that, and Law and Order would do it anyway, and so I just don't. We're really so separated,
right,
that it's like I really, you know, we did the case of the child in either Oregon or Washington who was who had a mastectomy and oophorectomy, who had terrible disability and had like the abilities of like a 6-month-old, and they called her the pillow angel, if you remember that story. And we did that show because that was a really interesting issue about what rights does a severely handicapped child have. Does she have the right to grow into an adult woman, or should she be made more easily, should she be made more packaged for her parents? And that's what the parents said. It would be much easier to deal with her if she'd never menstruated, if she didn't grow into a woman. So we took on that show. I mean, that's a really interesting, important topic. And then Law and Order did it as well, which is fine, because to your point, maybe it's good that we all do these shows so that you see them. And repeats are really good too. So because 45 million people see our show a week, They're seeing the repeats. There is some, just from the data from the Kaiser study that was published in Health Affairs, people do learn facts. They learn things. So we have to keep telling those stories. So the lag time it could be like maybe a month if we chose to do it. But I probably, I won't do that. I won't do that. I won't do Michael Jackson. I just don't want to be tawdry because it's about sex crimes anyway, so I have to fight that. But Law and Order, I bet you will do Roman Polanski probably, you'll see it within the next 2 months.
On the second row here.
I work in cable marketing, and I was curious. You're talking about cutting through and really making contact with your viewers. How much influence do you have over your marketing, and what do you think you could do to target people in a different way?
Well, we fight a lot with NBC about promotion because they're obviously going to promote their new show as well, so I get that. So I became a Twitterer, and I do Twitter bubbles, and I've had 50,000 hits on our Twitter bubbles. And I Twitter about the show and guest stars, but I'm going to start Twittering about the topics in conjunction with participant. So I've reached out in as many different ways as I possibly can and have the time to do to bring in viewers, link viewers, because with participant they can go and they'll go to other websites and find out about the issues. I can Twitter and blog, with the show. I've done that before while the show is on, and the NBC will say, Neil Baer, the executive producer and writer of SVU, is on, and he's blogging right now. And I got people asking, celebrity-style questions and questions about the show. And I'm going to try this little experiment to push into the policy arena starting this week. I haven't done it yet, and I've just been waiting for this, and I'm going to talk about the Pew. I'm going to say, if you're interested, go to the study done by Pew. 1 out of 100 people in the United States is in prison. And let them go and see, and I'll see, I can have a conversation on Twitter with all the fans. There are 3,000 people who are following me. They're not all on at the same time, but I make times when I go on. But they ask me, like, are Mariska and Chris going to get together? And, that kind of stuff, which is like, I get it. So I have to, play to the fans, and tease them and stuff. But I'm also very interested in the policy issues. So I think a lot about how do I do it on Facebook? How do I get NBC to put more stuff on Facebook? How do I do these links? How do I do social networking? These are all the questions that I'm thinking about, and everybody's going to think about more and more as the viewing audience becomes more niched. Well, that's important right now because we moved.
Yes, no, absolutely. And that's the most important thing, but it doesn't seem to necessarily really get into the topic, the issues. So I think that's great.
No, because I think that the mindset of the promotion department at NBC is Mariska and Chris. And that's okay. Because as long as people watch, I can tell any story I want. And I don't think if I said, tonight, solitary confinement, is it torture? I mean, if people click, But that's what they're going to get. And they're going to get this amazing performance by Chris Maloney, next week. And going back to this question again that was asked before, I can't say it's going to change any people's minds, but I know that emotionally it's terrifying and gripping what we show in next week's show about solitary confinement, and we looked at all the data as much as we could.
And certainly it's more likely to change people's minds than watching Hardball with somebody who's identified as from the left and somebody identified from the right, because you're seeing it in a different setting,
Exactly.
I would think.
And that's that first thing that I said was why I love drama, because drama is different. Drama is storytelling and seeing the story, and people act it out, but we're not coming to the show and saying, I'm watching people act it out. I'm thinking, we don't typically say that unless it's really bad, Let me say, oh my God, it's really stinky. But if I'm watching something and I'm in it, I'm almost like I'm in real life. I'm watching something unfold. And I think that that can have an effect. But now I got to go back and look at the researcher I work with at UCLA and ask him to pull anything that's been done. But that's good. I'm glad you brought that up.
Next door. Allison.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about mental health issues for a bit. I would say, excuse me, the average American really doesn't know much about mental disorders, and this is one of the few shows that actually kind of shows the debate that there is. Would you say you have a particular agenda? I want to know, do you do a lot of research on it? Because I think this is one of the few shows that actually, let's take pedophilia, for instance. SVU kind of shows that these aren't just evil people. There is, there's a mental illness involved, and so sort of that debate. So would you say you have a particular agenda about that?
I don't know that agenda is the right word, but I'm really interested in the issues. I find it fascinating. So episode 5 with Rosie Perez, who is amazing, and it plays a mother who doesn't know that her kid is being abused by his stepfather. And he is a pedophile who says this is how he was born. And they try to make the argument that, there are kids who are okay with it. And this is an argument that pedophiles are making now and they're also making the argument that, they're just like anybody else. You didn't accept gay marriage, and now some states do, and homosexuality wasn't accepted, and it's you can't discriminate against them, and you couldn't have African Americans and white people getting married, and now they can. And you can see where this is going. We make those arguments on the show because I think it's really interesting, and we have to grapple with as a society, what do we do with people who probably are hardwired? I don't think someone chooses to be a pedophile. So they're hardwired and they can't stop. How do we design treatment and how do we deal with this? And so I think these are some of the toughest topics that our society can deal with. How do we deal with kids who are sociopaths? When psychiatrists are saying they're not treatable, what do we do? So, God, I'm going to do a story about that because that's just so interesting to me. We have the show, episode 4, is alcoholism a brain disease? If it is, and it's not a personality weakness, what does that say to the legal system? Schizophrenia is a brain disease, and we make exceptions for people who are schizophrenic, who murder or do bad things, because they weren't in control, they weren't rational, they didn't know the consequences. Well, we might be able to make some arguments if we accept the research that is saying that alcoholism is a brain disease and someone can't stop drinking. It's not, it's like you could stop drinking, and they can't, and they use this as a defense. Now, it's always been thrown out before, but now NIH and Alan Leshner, who used to run NIDA, say, our government says, and we say this on the show, alcoholism is a brain disease. What does that say for legal defenses? So, yeah, I think it's so fascinating. I'm really lucky to be able to grapple with those mental health issues. It's not just like someone's crazy.
In the corner.
For those of us who work with certain issues, and I work on a health campaign, who do we talk to, or how do we get,
how do you get your issue out there?
How do you get your issue out there?
Well, if it's on health issues, through Hollywood Health and Society, for instance, and because I'm interested. So, in other words, when Atul Gawande wrote the piece about, he wrote about
the New Yorker piece,
the checklist, not the recent one on the Texas, but he wrote about the checklist, the OR checklist, and he wrote about mistakes in hospitals. I brought him through Hollywood Health and Society to ER, and that was Eric LaSalle came back, and that was huge that Eric was back on the show after all those years. And that had the ramifications were amazing. That really was policy in action. I know for a fact that hospitals, Mount Sinai, various hospitals in New York, everywhere, were forced the surgeons to see that 10-minute piece and make them adopt this. And Atul was thrilled. But that's so simple because it's so obvious. Like, it's a very specific policy that you can translate. It's very clear. It has very clear outcomes, and you can really. TV's great at that. So we were able to do that. So we could go to Hollywood Health and Society. They bring in experts, and they have briefings with writers about everything: childhood obesity, new genetics. How are we going to pay for all of the what pathologists are saying are going to be the 10,000 new tests within the next 5 years? So, and it is advocacy in the sense of you're trying to get your issue out there, but I don't find it's not a political advocacy so much as it is an issue advocacy, because the Washington Post wrote a piece, a couple of years ago about how, advocacy groups have no place in Hollywood, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think that writers should be open to all different points of view and get this information and not just write the same old junk that they usually write.
Let's go to the back to Jennifer. Just trying to give you a good workout, Oliver.
I don't think this question has already been asked. The question is, has there been any topic whatsoever that proved finally to be verboten, that network standards and practices turned thumbs down? Have you ever hit the wall?
Once.
What
What was it? And it's really interesting. It was on ER, but nothing. I mean, I've done, you name it. And you tell me a topic, if you can tell me one that you think that they would say no to. I did torture, abortion, pedophilia. I haven't done bestiality, but that's just like, come on. I mean, I wouldn't do. I don't think. Probably they did. Yeah. I mean, I have done a show about people who dress as animals and really get into that, which is a really interesting paraphilia. The only time we were ever censored in the 15 years I've been doing this is we did an episode of ER where a young woman came in having OD'd on Tylenol. And it turned out that she was pregnant by her brother. And the nurses were talking about it on the show in the elevator, and the father overheard it. Because I had actually experienced something like that where nurses were talking about a very, very touchy case. It was not that case, and the father heard it, and so that always stuck with me. And so the network said, "Oh my gosh, this is a triple whammy. You have incest, you have teen suicide attempt, and you have a product that is causing damage." And so ultimately they said, you can do the incest, that's fine. We don't
Pick
care.
2 out of the 3.
You can do the incest. You can show the suicide, the effects of the suicide, because there's been some research, it's equivocal, about whether there's an uptick in suicide attempts after they see it on TV if you show it like everybody's sad that you died. And so they said, show what it's like when she comes in. And so she's getting charcoal and she's vomiting black and she's a mess and it's horrifying. And they said, you can do that, but you can't say Tylenol. And you look at the labeling of Tylenol back then, it was probably 1995, and it didn't say back then that you shouldn't take it if you drink more than several drinks a day. Because Tylenol was the drug of choice, particularly of young women, as a suicide drug. But they didn't think that it would kill them, so it was like a cry for help drug. But it turns out it's a terrible drug because it causes fulminant liver failure. You need a liver transplant. You feel fine. You take Tylenol, and then you say, oh, I took Tylenol, I OD'd, and they do all this stuff. But, and you don't think as the person taking the drug that it's going to really maybe kill you. But it's a bad thing to do. But it can really do terrible things to you. So we wanted to get that out, and they said you have to say acetaminophen, and I said nobody knows what acetaminophen is. And then Johnson & Johnson was one of the sponsors, and they said you can't do it. And so they said no, and Tony Edwards said, I'm going to say Tylenol, and they just bleeped him. And so everybody knew he was saying Tylenol. They really cut their nose off in spite of themselves. That by doing that, everybody saw that it was Tylenol. But that's the only time that a product really stopped us. Otherwise, I mean, I don't go after products per se. I mean, I did a show when Eli Lilly was sending out Prozac to people off their list because they were making a Prozac that was for a week, worked for a week versus a day, and they were doing some really, naughty things, and we did that show, and NBC said fine. But they didn't have Prozac being advertised on NBC and Johnson & Johnson. But otherwise, never. Knock on wood. I mean, I hope that doesn't change. But if I said I want to bring a new character on SVU who's an upper middle class white male who is HIV and is not gay but got HIV, some years ago and has been treated with ARVs, and I just want him to deal with it, they'd probably say no. So maybe I self-censor. I think that they think it's too down, and this is not the time to be doing shows. This is like we need comfortable shows in these times. I hear that a lot at the network. We need something comfortable. So I think I probably self-censor in that way. I probably wouldn't bring on... India has a detective series with an HIV-positive detective on it. HIV is increasing still in the United States amongst certain groups. African-American women, young gay men. Where do we see that? Instead, we see swine flu, swine flu, swine flu. It's not going to kill nearly as many people as HIV is going to kill both here and in the rest of the world.
We have about 5 more minutes, so why don't we take 2 or 3 comments, questions, and then you can react
Great.
As you see fit, just to get more people in the conversation by the door.
Thank you. Did I understand you earlier when you said you don't coordinate much or at all with the other 2 Law and Order shows?
Correct. Not at all.
I asked because it would seem to me that if you and your colleagues from the other 2 shows thought there was an interesting topic to pursue from different angles or the same angle, that would be a real interesting television programming if the 3 of you hit it, there was overlapping messages.
Yes.
So why don't we hold off, and
Okay.
you can react to a
Right.
number of folks over there.
I'm wondering if you see a role for television in environmental issues and issues such as climate change and sustainability as well.
And then here in the front.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, and then the front row, and then we'll...
Okay. I'm interested in social change as well, and so your documentary sounds fascinating. I'd like to hear how I could view that and pass it around my organization, which does a lot of work in Africa. But I'm also interested in trying to reach the U.S. And talking specifically about conflict management and preventative conflict arrangements. So have you thought about working those kind of themes into some of your programming consciously or as a top-of-mind issue rather than as a means to getting to other things? And as a corollary to that, do you know where the show The Philanthropist is in terms of standings or anything that you could tell us about its background? Would be interesting.
And then lastly in the front. And the challenge for you is to remember all this.
I do.
This follows on your point about conflict resolution. So much of what we look at in the United States has to do with content and facts and, well, facts in quotation marks, policy, that kind of thing. But so much of what really is important has to do with process, how things are done. And that's very difficult to portray in a TV show. But I was wondering if that kind of approach would be useful, especially since I'm intrigued, even though you said that you don't like to educate, per se, in terms of what you're doing. But I can just see using some of those clips in a classroom to help people, help the kids start to think about their own thinking, as opposed to what the content only is about.
Have at it.
Okay. We have done crossovers. It hasn't worked out well for a number of reasons. The shows are on different nights. We have done the crossover. It's an issue of branding versus individuality, and I want my show to be not the mothership but SVU. So by choice, I don't link. And Criminal Intent's now on a different network. So by choice, I don't work with those. Though I did write an episode. I wrote a 6-hour miniseries called Terror, and I was at the World Trade Center the Friday before 9/11 because we were doing a show about terrorism. I did anthrax research. It was so fascinating because I talked to a lot of people who ended up going into there weren't a lot of experts. There were only studies done on orangutans, and nobody really knew anything. And so we were queried because we did so much research. We knew what university was the best place to go, University of Minnesota, to learn about spraying and things like that because we had done this, and we never made the miniseries because of what happened. But that was crossing over with all three. But it's a big undertaking. So, it's funny you ask because NBC is pushing us to do it right now. So what do you do? I'm wondering, are you someone from NBC? It's like that's such a specific kind of question.
I wish.
So we're thinking about it, but I also want to maintain the integrity of my own show. In terms of green, NBC is doing Green Week, and I'm supposed to be putting in something in my show, in episode 9 about that. I did it when they were cleaning up the Hudson last year. But that's kind of hokey. And making a mention, it's nice because it makes, GE feel like all their shows are doing that. So I do try to do a show. So I did one about wildlife conservation last year where the number 3 trade, drugs, guns, wildlife, sex. Unbelievable what's going on. And so we did a show about wildlife trade. And so we try to, and I think that shows are, I think it's a little hokey to do it once, but I think that shows are trying to, and they're certainly getting that message from the network to try to do it. So I think you'll be seeing more and more of that, actually. And a show about climate change, there have been numbers of shows that, are like the fringe kind of shows and things that really try to do it. But a show can, I think any drama can do this is getting back to the very beginning about policy. If you really, if you were the head writer, the showrunner like I am, and you were passionate about it, you could probably do it. It's trying to change the culture of writers as well. And the Writers Guild's trying to do that a bit with a showrunners program that I'm involved in, and I do the session on trying to get people to think beyond the typical stories they're going to tell. In terms of conflict management, in terms of my movie, go to www.homeiswhereyouFindit.org, and you should be able to see the film. You'll see a trailer of the film. It's going to be at the New Orleans Film Festival, Louisville Film Festival, New Hampshire Film Festival, a couple of festivals in Africa, Big Apple Film Festival in New York soon. It was here at Silver Docks. It'll probably be at Sundance. Hopefully it'll ultimately be on Sundance or PBS or one of those. But you can find it, and then you can kind of email us and get information on it. And in terms of conflict management or conflict resolution, there are a number of advocacy organizations that deal with that and talk to writers. And public health schools, like Harvard, has done that a lot as well. And they've wanted to put mentoring in and squash it. The person who devised designated driver, Jay Winston, very powerful policy. Put that in. All the networks had put it in, and it had a huge impact. It doesn't deal with the issue of the drinking issue per se, but at least people aren't going to it puts out there. Don't drive drunk. The networks don't allow anybody to be shown not wearing a seatbelt on television. I don't allow people to smoke on my show. The networks don't like it, but they say if it's needed, unless there's a very specific reason, and I have a very specific reason for Christine Lottie's character, because she turns out to be an alcoholic who's desperately trying not to drink again. So I allowed smoking. So policy has seeped in that sense, but again, very specific policies: seatbelts, no smoking, designated driver. If you can encapsulate something in that kind of way, then you obviously have a good the checklist. But really good dramas are about conflict resolution, and so maybe the point is that you maybe try to articulate that in some way, and say, "Wow, we really made it through," or you just point it out. I think is maybe what you're saying, that maybe we don't do enough of just saying this is a good way of getting through this, as opposed to, because good drama is always conflict. You saw a lot of conflict here, and we're coming to some resolution. When I talk about, I don't call it education. Of course, if I didn't care, like this one medical series on ABC and just said whatever, and had interns operating on people when they never do and things like that, then I wouldn't, but I know people learn. I don't I try not to be pedantic, and it's really what the word is. I don't want Tamara Tooney to stop, because I've done it, and I start to cringe, where she says, 1 out of 3 teenagers has a sexually transmitted disease, and you just go, and the whole show like screeches to a halt. So I try to get that information out in a, I said the word, in a felicitous way, but still out there. But I didn't show you clips, but we've had all kinds of clips about, or the girl who was on the stand said, I tried to get the abortion pill, but the pharmacist, we have reports of pharmacists who don't do it. I went to the hospital. They said I had to have my father's permission. This is all education. These are all facts, because we did talk about it. It was the state of Virginia. But I just don't want to be pedantic, because I don't want to tell people, you should do this or you should do that. And that's what good drama is. You watch O'Neill plays or whatever, or... Well, we used to do that a lot for ER, and what we say is, it's on the internet, and we can't stop you from doing whatever it is that you want, because it gets into guilt issues and all of that. But, John Wells has always said that too from ER. We say, everything's on the internet now, and we can't stop anybody from using clips to educate for nonprofit reasons.
Well, Neil, thank you. This has been fantastic.
Well, thank you for having me.
You ought to have a show about let's set at a DC think tank. Call it the Next America Foundation.
I think so.
Or
that would be good.
And thank you all for commenting. And for those of you watching on, yeah, exactly.